Okay. You're still able to see the screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So again, welcome to our Mussar webinar. The topic is equanimity, which translates as Menuchat HaNefesh, as I just said, which means basically rest for the soul. I'm going to start with our agenda. I always invite everyone to join our Facebook group. I'll put a link in our follow-up email. It's a place where we put out some ideas for the monthly topic, and people have the same ring. People answer the question of a global discussion about whatever it is that is the monthly topic. We also have places where people can share things that have gotten in their groups, and I invite you to do that. So let's look at the themes for this month. The fifth topic, equanimity, Menuchat HaNefesh. In English, the word equanimity comes from the Latin word equanimitas. Aquis means even, and animus means soul or mind. So Judaism is not the only religion to value one's ability to remain composed even when they're exposed to distress. It's part of the Hindu yoga tradition. It's a byproduct of Buddhist meditation. There was a central concept of the Stoic ethics of the ancient Greeks. We're going to incorporate some yoga and meditation into our practices with this midah as well. But first, let's talk about menucha, which is rest. It's one of the three values of Shabbat, along with oneg, rejoicing, and kedusha, holiness. So Shabbat is one of the primary Jewish spiritual practices that can aid in equanimity and making you feel balanced. And Menuchat HaNefesh, equanimity of the soul. You take a day once a week to rejuvenate. So as we go forward and look at the text for this session, we're going to see that 3 of the 4 texts are from the Mussar masters. I'll talk about them later in the webinar, their history and who they are. Many of the Mussar masters taught how important equanimity was to the cultivation of a spiritual life. As you know, this midah is called Menuchat HaNefesh, which means rest of the soul. So the spirit is the soul, and we'll see how that plays into it. So when you look at these symptoms of suffering from a lack of equanimity, they might be not being calm, an inclination to react rather than to think things through, indecision, clutter, overly busy, search for ego gratification, ingratitude, and worry. So you can think about whether you or anyone you know is experiencing these things. I know that I'm a big worrier, and striving for equanimity is very important to my my success. So let's look at the themes. Equanimity is essential to the cultivation of a spiritual life, and it's translated, as I said, as Menuchat HaNefesh. In Hebrew, it literally means rest of the soul. So, for example, you can go on vacation, but if you take all your troubles with you, you're just laying on the beach worrying. You're not finding Menuchat HaNefesh. You're not finding equanimity. So let's see how to look at these texts and ways to make them relevant to your groups. The opening activity I call the stress test. You begin by focusing your participants on times in their lives when equanimity was elusive. Give each an index card or a piece of paper and a pen, and have them write down a stressful situation that they've experienced, either recently or in the past. And then, if your group is the kind of group that this works for, go around the room and share. If not, just put the questions that you see on the screen out in front of them and have each person answer in writing on their own. How did you deal with the experience? And do you think you got through it with equanimity? Why or why not? That's going to make the text we're about to study more relevant to them, because they'll be thinking about actual situations where they could use this thought. So let's look at the first text. The first text is by Menachem Mendel Levin. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born in the Ukraine, where he had a traditional Jewish education, but unlike many of the people at that time, it was also supplemented by studies in science, mathematics, and medieval philosophy. In the early 1780s, he lived in Berlin, where he met Moses Mendelssohn and other Haskalah leaders which you might know promoted rationalism, liberalism, and freedom of thought. Is my cough drop. Okay. Hopefully that'll sound better. He campaigned in favor of adding general education to the standard curriculum in Jewish schools. That was not done at that time. And he was a fierce opponent of the Hasidic movement and the Kabbalah, which he viewed as nonsense. He died in Tarnopol in 1826. This text is from Leffen's work, Cheshbon HaNefesh, which literally means moral accounting. Sometimes if you look at Mussar study, they encourage Mussar students to do Cheshbon HaNefesh, to keep a diary and account for their thoughts and their character. But this book, Cheshbon HaNefesh, draws from classic sources, and it's like a step-by-step program for self-improvement and character development. And it gives hope and help to people who want to better themselves. It was published in 1809, and it was influenced by the ethical program described in the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, of all people. So it's interesting. Let's look at the text. It is, rise above events that are inconsequential, both bad and good, for they are not worth disturbing your equanimity. And so we might say, if we were doing that these days, choose your battles, or let certain things not disturb you. And some of the conversation questions that go with this: what kind of inconsequential events might the text be asking us to rise above? And that invites us to examine ourselves and kind of rate what's worth going crazy over and what's not, and why. There are some things that are worth being upset about. We don't have to be happy all the time, but we have to choose intelligently, with some perspective, what is an inconsequential event, and not always get upset over little things. Think about events that are on the index cards. Where do they fit in? Are they inconsequential, looking back at them, or not? Every person has a different level of tolerance to daily events, and your experience also affects whether you're going to react with equanimity. What are some things that make it easier for a person to have equanimity? Do you think experience makes it easier or more difficult to have equanimity, and why? You could say, well, I've experienced this thing before. I know I got through it, so I'm going to be a little more evenly balanced now. Or you could say, I experienced this before and it was absolutely horrible and I'm scared. So, well, I think possibly experience makes it better. There is a debate that could go on both sides. Then ask your participants to assess their own ability to rise above events that are inconsequential. Do they tend to sweat the small stuff or not? How do they decide what is the small stuff? And then another way to look at the topic, there are a number of words used to describe someone who is equanimous. Other than calm, cool, and collected, what other words or expressions would be on your list? This helps you to kind of define it for yourself. And how do you feel when you're the person who's this way? You know, maybe they have a calming influence on you. And as I was saying before, do you think experience helps a person to gain equanimity? My vote goes to yes, but I can see both sides. Okay, any questions? We can go to the next text. Okay, this one is from Rav Simcha Zissel Ziv. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was born in Lithuania. He later moved to Latvia. When he moved, he changed his name from his father's family name. They were a famous rabbi family. I'm probably going to pronounce it incorrectly. They were like Braud. He changed to his mother's name, which was Ziv. He was one of the foremost students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who was the founder of the Mussar movement. And Rav Simcha Zissel Ziv was also one of the early leaders of the Mussar movement. He's known best as the founder of the Kelm Talmud Torah, which was a famous yeshiva in Lithuania. Unlike other yeshivas, the Talmud Torah focused primarily on the study of Mussar. And if you remember from the first session, Mussar leaders wanted Torah learning to be applied to character development so that their students would become wise and compassionate, not just learned. So he said, what is the foundational midah without which we can't have a good character? Equanimity. A person who has mastered peace of mind has gained everything. So what he's saying is that equanimity is not the goal, it's the tool. So let's think about this. Do you agree with this? Why or why not?
Are you really asking me?
Well, I could.
Oh. Okay.
I mean, there's no wrong answer. And what is your personal definition of good character? How large a part does equanimity play in it? That's something that you can do with your participants. You can see where they put equanimity in the mix of what makes good character. Other Mussar masters suggest different foundational virtues without which we can't have good character. So think, if you were to choose one foundational midah that underlies good character, what would it be? And if you'd like a list of midot, of character traits, to help your participants think about and answer this question, I can attach a PDF to the follow-up email with the midah cards that the teen program uses, and you can print it out and you can use it during your session, which would probably be very helpful. And the other thing is, he says, a person who has mastered peace of mind has gained everything. What would gained everything and what would peace of mind look like in your own life? It would be very interesting to discuss this. And it's a very good way to focus yourself and even kind of make yourself a roadmap. Like, where are you going? What are you trying to do? What is gaining everything? And what would provide peace of mind to a person? What does that actually mean in an individual basis? And that leads us to the next text. This is from Alan Marinis, who was the founder of the Mussar Institute. It's in Vancouver. He's more modern. He was born in 1949. He's still alive. He was born into a secular Jewish home in Toronto. He's also an anthropologist and a filmmaker and a writer. He was trained as an anthropologist, and he's a Rhodes Scholar in Oxford. This text is from Everyday Holiness, the Jewish spiritual path of Mussar, which is, again, a very practical set of teachings for cultivating personal growth and spiritual realization in the midst of day-to-day life. So let's look at the text. Tranquility doesn't spell the end of our spiritual struggles. It's the inner quality that equips us to handle them. That's very much what we were just saying. So the question is, does this surprise you? Is this, because before you started reading these texts, did you think that equanimity was something we were striving for, or something that was equipping us to handle the other things that we might have to handle in our life? So it kind of puts it in perspective for us. And referring back to the opening activity, look at what you've written down and what in your own life are things that tend to unsettle you. I always say I'm afraid of the wrong things because I live on a sailboat. I can climb the mast. None of that bothers me. The things that worry me are ridiculous. Those things don't bother me at all. So everyone has their, their things. And it'd be interesting to examine yourself and see what are the things that unsettle you. And that awareness is the first step to cultivate equanimity. In addition to equanimity, there might be other midot that are useful at such times. Many people find that other things that help them, equip them for struggles are patience, not my strong suit, humility, faith, simplicity, order, compassion. And your participants might find other things that they find, they think are essential to them. And it's interesting to see what helps a person handle their struggles and remain balanced. The midot most connected to equanimity, which we just discussed, would be interesting to discuss. If you're still doing chavruta, if you're still having pairs of people, you can break up into pairs and discuss this. And then come back and tell how you think of each of these midot works in equanimity. Which in your mind is least connected, which in your mind is most connected. And there are no wrong answers. So that's an interesting thing to discuss. And now I'm going to go to a text that is completely from another place, and that is from Exodus. It discusses Pharaoh's change of heart after letting the Israelites go. So as we read it, let's think about what part equanimity plays in decision making, because that's something that we haven't discussed yet. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, Pharaoh and his officials had a change of heart about the people and said, "What have we done that we've let the Israelites go from serving us?" So this text helps us to focus on deliberation, and equanimity helps you to be more deliberate in your decision making. Patience and thought are in play here. And it was wonderful for the Israelites that Pharaoh let them leave, but commentators have used this passage to remind us how important presence of mind is in our deliberations. Have you ever changed your mind in regards to a big decision? Probably if you have, the closer to the decision making you come to make this change, the less difficult it is. The longer you wait, the more difficult it becomes. When I read this text, I wondered why it was chosen as the one to illustrate the concept of careful deliberation. I'm interested in what you might think or what your participants might think is the cause of this. One thing I thought of is just that it's a story that most people know. So maybe it's an easy example. It might make it easier for participants to think about and share their own experiences once they have this as an example. So, and a note on decision making, I was thinking about this. Do you think decisions are more emotional or more rational when you make them? So I was talking about this with my teen educators. I told them that I heard a salesperson describe this and say, you know what, people make a decision emotionally and then they rationalize it. They see something they want and they know they're going to buy it, but they have to say, well, I'm getting a bargain or I need it or whatever the reason is. So I think that you're making an emotional decision and then rationalizing it. But then one of the people on my call disagreed with me. She said that that's probably true for purchases, but she said, I'm going to discuss with my students how they're deciding which college to go to. I know that, I don't think that, I still think it can be an emotional decision that you rationalize. But I think people might come to it different ways. What's your thought on this? I'm really asking you.
I'm sure it's a combination. Emotion, practical things, all of it comes together for important decisions. Pros, cons, long-term effects, short-term effects. Big decisions require lots of consideration.
Right. So that can be a very interesting thing to discuss with your group as well. I think it may be a personality thing. There may be people who are more emotional and people who are more rational, and they make their decisions different ways. So this is an interesting discussion. And do you think that this discussion of decision making is advocating one or the other? Do you think that equanimity and our discussion of it is encouraging people to make decisions more rationally, or just giving examples and you're still going to be yourself? And there's no right answer again. What do you think?
I'm sorry, you cut out on me just a little bit, so I'm not sure I totally understand the question.
Oh.
But for me, equanimity comes into play more so in those trigger moments when I worry about, am I responding or am I reacting? Decisions require, hopefully equanimity is the end result. You feel good about your decision. You don't have to backtrack and be upset with the decision. But it's those unexpected moments or difficult conversations where I want to call upon equanimity to have the outcome that I really want.
That's a very good point. I'm glad you made that. And I think it's going to enrich your discussion when you do this with your group. I think it's a really good point.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing it. And that kind of brings us to our practices, which is really good because these practices help us to bring equanimity into our lives and to cultivate that midah in ourselves. So the first practice And these practices cover all the different aspects we've discussed. This one relates directly to the aspect we're just discussing, to decision making. So for a month after you do this, try to be especially attuned to bechira, choice, this month. Clear thinking and clear decision making. Be mindful of decisions on the horizon and give enough time and space to discern the proper path. I also find that trying to figure out why I've made a decision, why am I giving this answer? And is it really right for me, or is it right for someone else? Is it right for both people? Like what are all the things going into my decisions is something to think about this month. The second practice relates to a piece of equanimity we haven't discussed much so far, but it's important, and that's Shabbat as a day to rebalance. This day, of course, there are many different ways to observe Shabbat, from traditional to more personal. You could talk with your participants about how they observe Shabbat. If you're all from the same synagogue, chances are you might be similar in your observances. I'm not that traditional. I don't go to shul every Shabbat. But I use electricity, I drive my car, but I never work on Shabbat. I don't answer emails. And I plan activities with my family and friends. To me, that's the essence of Shabbat, and that's what helps me to recharge and to rebalance. So it would be an interesting idea to share with your participants what is the core of Shabbat and how it can restore equanimity. So Abraham Joshua Heschel, I think, was the one who said, having a day to avoid what might be stressful during the week, you can focus on spiritual matters of the mind. It's a day to be and not to do, is what he said. Practice one Shabbat, or part of one Shabbat, without going on the internet, texting, shopping, using your car or appliances. I'm good with all of those except texting. And I don't think it's an anti-Shabbat thing. I want to know if my kids need me. They are all adults, but nonetheless, if they want me, I want to be at the other end of that text. But I agree. The reason that's okay is because to me, that's family. But shopping, try to go a Saturday without shopping. See how that restores your equanimity. Prepare your meals ahead of time. Spend the day with friends or family, being in nature, going to synagogue, reading or meditating. And a nice decision. What is a perfect Shabbat? What are the Shabbat activities that would be meaningful to your participants? It might be fun to plan a Shabbat with your group, some kind of activity with your group. And if you do, share it on Facebook, because that would be very nice. The next practice I'm going to talk about is actually a kind of a yoga stance. The goal of surfing is to stay on top of an inherently unstable wave and not fall off the board or get pulled under by the turbulence. Practice equanimity and you will learn the ability to stay above the fray and to stay focused on your ultimate goal without getting pulled under or diverted. Sometimes an image or body stance is a helpful tool to cultivate this midah. So use the surfer image to stay calm in two different ways. One, to build equanimity before you feel unsettled, and two, to calm down in response to a difficult situation. So what you do is stand with your feet slightly apart, visualize yourself riding on a surfboard, shift your weight from one foot to the other, paying special attention to your balance as the waves shift. Practice this body stance daily for a month. I used to practice this on the subway because, it moves, and I used to actually, my friend that I was commuting with, I'd always tell her I was surfing. She thought I was crazy, but I think it's important to think about that as the month goes on. And then there's another yoga stance. People may already practice yoga or meditation, and it'd be interesting to see how it affects their state of mind. Jewish yoga and meditation might be an interesting independent study project for someone, for a study or a spiritual practice for a group member. So the next practice is about meditation. Meditation is a well-known practice for building equanimity into one's life. If you've never done it before, one simple practice is to close your eyes and just focus on your breath, noticing how it moves in your body. When your mind wanders, return to a focus on your breath. Another embodied practice would be to stand in mountain pose, which you can see on the screen here. That, you can see it better over there. And like the mountain, which remains constant and unreactive regardless of snow, rain, or heat waves, imagine what it would be like to remain relatively constant, relaxed, and unruffled in response to news and other external stimuli. That's a very nice practice for this midah. And then this one is very nice also. Choose one of the following phrases to repeat to yourself when you become worried or overwhelmed. You might find it helpful to write one or more of them on a small strip of paper and carry it with you so you have it when you need it. One that speaks to you. Do not become agitated on the way. Calmness and humility are partners. That's a good one. May there be peace within your ramparts. Beside tranquil waters, God leads me. That could be just a visualization of being in a very tranquil place. Rise above the good and the bad. Be calm and deliberate. Consider matters before speaking or acting. In our teen program, we have this thing. It's called Wait, Why Am I Talking? W-A-I-T, and that's an interesting thing to think about. So these are all different things you might want to keep in mind, keep in your pocket or keep in your head to help you be calm. And now we go to personal reflection. Each source book includes questions on the back cover to help focus participants on their independent projects. So at the end of the session, take a couple of minutes to look at the questions on the back cover and have each participant answer them, either in writing or share as a group, whichever works best for you. The questions are, and they relate the independent project to the midah of equanimity. What insights have you gained from your independent projects? And how have these insights affected your day-to-day equanimity? Those are the two questions. And then, how have your independent projects affected the equanimity of others? So you're looking at both how your project affects you and how it affects the people that you are sharing it with. And that's a nice way to bring equanimity into your life and see how it affects things. Then we have some links to additional information, which are really good links. If unplugging from your devices once a week for Shabbat seems like a stretch for you, get involved in the National Day of Unplugging. And there's a link here. This project is predicated on the belief that in our busy lives, we no longer know how to take a break in order to recharge, which was the biblical idea behind a Sabbath day. A New York Times article about the project entitled, "On the Sabbath, the iPhones Shall Rest," can be found at this. That can be very interesting. Then another interesting additional source is a classic book about Shabbat, the Sabbath, by Abraham Joshua Heschel. You might want to flip through it and find relevant, meaningful stuff. And for further information on meditation practice, you may want to listen to podcasts offered through the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, and there's a link, or the Awakened Heart Project, and there's a link to that as well. When I send out my follow-up email, I'll send out a PDF of these slides, and I think the links work in the PDF, so that should be easy. And that leads me to any questions or comments that you might want to share. And if you don't want to share any, then I will say thank you so much for joining me. I'm very glad you're here. And look for a follow-up email with all of the things that we discussed.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.